So question, what is the black man's story? How did we Africans migrate into the four corners of the earth? These are some of the questions that I began to ask myself growing up as a young black man. Like, how did we first leave Africa? Did we leave as subjugated slaves or as masters of our own destiny? And African Connections, where Africans control the African narrative, we seek to dig deeper into many topics such as these. By sharing each other's history, African Connections seeks to bring the global African family closer together. Now, as an African Jamaican who migrated to the United States, I often wondered, how did so many different nationality of Africans or black people end up in America? Or much more, how did so many different Africans and different nationalities end up into so many places around the world? And when did it occur? How did we arrive in the four corners of the earth? Now, in today's modern era, it has been proven by scientists that all humans originated in Africa and from Africans. So when did we leave? How did hundreds of millions of blacks, if not billions, and Africans end up in so many different countries around the world? Now, even though scientists have proven that Africa is the origin of humankind, we still have many people in the world who believe that wherever you see Africans outside of the African continent, they somehow arrived there because of slavery. Now, this theory is heavily promoted within the Western and Middle Eastern cultures. Take this map for example. This map details the migration of people within the last 500 to 600 years. However, out of all the examples, notice that only one of the examples has a reason given for their migration: the Africans. And written in parentheses next to the Africans, the word slaves. As if to suggest that all Africans who left Africa within the last 500 years left as enslaved Africans. But is this true? Or is this propaganda? Now, I'm not denying that slavery happened, by no means, but I do not subscribe to the propaganda that blacks first arrived in the Americas and Asia as enslaved Africans. In fact, knowing history of the different nations provided on this map, I can tell you that the first Chinese people brought to the Americans, or the majority of them that was brought to the Americans after the European conquest, were used to build railroads. Or the first Indians brought from India to the Caribbean and South America and Central America were brought there as indentured servants. So I see no emphasis on their purpose of their migration. And it would not be factual to say every Chinese in the last 500 to 600 years who arrived in America are descended from railroad builders. Just as it would be wrong for me to say that all Indians from India that you see in America today or in the Caribbean or Central America are descended from indentured servants. Just emphasizing my point once again that some of the powers that be are trying to keep the narrative of Africans as slave going. Well, we are not about that. So in this post-era of slavery and colonialization, an era which sought to erase the history and sometimes even erase black people themselves and erase African cultures, we, the African descendants, must tell our ancestors' story. Africans are not slaves. Africans were enslaved. Slavery is not African history. It was an interruption to African history. So we must control our own narrative. And to this cause, African Connections is committed to play its part. So in my journey towards answering some of the questions of how Africans migrated out of the African continent into the four corners of the earth, I first began by digging into research done by modern scientists and historic evidence left by our ancestors. I feel that is this information which we should value and not the racist superstitious opinions of others. So if you're going to be able to prove things today, you have to prove it from a scientific point of view, as well as you have to rely on what our story from our ancestors said. Now, it's been said that the Africans were the most ancient people from in the ancient days, especially Ethiopia. But today, now with today's advanced technology, scientists have begun using human genes to track the same information, or to find, track human migration through the earth. So for those who don't know what genes are made up of DNA, which is itself a substance in our body that carries all the information on how we will look and function. It is basically the traits handed down to us from our mothers and fathers. Now, by mapping the appearance and frequency of these genetic markers in modern people, scientists have created a picture of when and where ancient humans moved around the world. Now, since it is evident that Africans could easily walk from Africa into Asia and into Europe, and island hop into Australia and the Pacific Islands, it is no mystery of how Africans traveled from Africa into those lands. But what about the Western Hemisphere? What about North America, Central America, the Caribbean, South America, areas not connected to the landmass of Africa and Asia? So what's going on now is that geneticists have now mapped the path of ancient human migrations using these ancient DNA markers. And they have found concrete proof concerning the migration of not only Africans but of the entire human race. And what the genetic evidence has brought to light is that from 200,000 to 100,000 years ago, Africa was the only place on earth where modern humans lived. So that means that 200,000 to 100,000 years ago, according to modern scientists or genetic scientists, everybody was Africans, confirming that Africa is the birthplace of humankind. Geneticists are also narrowing down their research by homing in on the earliest woman and man that links all humans. While they have not zeroed in on the male Y chromosome as of yet, scientists have found mitochondrial DNA, which is derived from a mother's X chromosome, and this one woman they have found links all humans to a single female. So literally, she is the mother of all humans. So her name, mitochondrial Eve, or the name given to the woman now known as the most recent common female ancestor for all living humans, this means that all the mitochondrial DNA in all living humans is derived from hers. Now, mitochondrial Eve is the female counterpart, as I said, of the Y chromosomal atom, the most recent common patriarchal or male ancestor. Now, she is believed to have lived about 150,000 years ago in what is now Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania. The time she lived is calculated based on the molecular clock technique of correlating elapsed time while observed genetic drift. So, with the most advanced methods available, scientists have found that the mitochondrial DNA of the most recent mother of all modern humans, and it has led them to an African woman. So it can be scientifically proven that Africans are the mother race of humankind, and that we all descended from Africa around the era of Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania. So the evidence also said that humans eventually left Africa about 100,000 to about 75,000 years ago. First walking into South Asia, then into Central Asia, and from there they walked further eastwards towards East Asia and down into Australia and so on. Now, coincidentally, the last ice age on Earth also began about 100,000 years ago, and that created glaciers and ice walls that were impossible for humans to cross at that time. So, though Africans left Africa around 100,000 years ago, it was not until 40,000 years ago that Africans or humans arrived in Europe. And as for the Americas, geneticists geneticists and archaeologists, scientists can now prove that the first migration of humans in the Americas started around 13,600 years ago by examining skeletons. However, what a lot of the scientists are not quick to tell you is that the ice wall that had been blocking the passage from Asia into the Americas during the Ice Age did not melt until 13,000 years ago. So if the popular theory is that the first humans entered the Americas by crossing over a frozen sheet of ice, which created a bridge to connect what is now Russia to Alaska. And fun fact, Russia sold Alaska to the United States in 1867. So if the scientific evidence says that the walls of ice, which blocked the entrance from Asia into America, did not start to melt until around 13,000 years ago, how are scientists finding skeletons in the Americas dating from 13,600 years ago and older, meaning that they were here before the Ice Age, before those walls melted? The answers to these questions will shed light on how our African sisters reached the Americas thousands of years before any European and any Asian phenotype. But first, let me summarize what I've learned so far. So the first place to be populated by human beings on Earth, or the headquarters and origin of human beings, is Africa. And when humans began to populate the Earth, they left Africa to populate the rest of the Earth. They did not come into Africa. And from Africa, they populated first Asia, Australia, the Pacific Islands, and then Europe. But what about the Americas? How did humans get over here? Were we the first Africans? Were we Africans the first people to get over here? Or did, as people adapted and their outer look changes, or what we call race today changes, were they the first ones to explore different parts of the earth? Let's examine. So, beginning in 1974, archaeologists in the Americas began to find skeleton remains that would start to answer these questions with concrete proof. The new evidence would put the theory of the first humans crossing from Asia into the Americas into question. So in 1974, Luzia, the name given to the first skeleton dug up in Brazil, was dated to about 11,500 years ago. And yes, you heard it right, she was found in Brazil, not Alaska, not Canada, not the lower United States. It was found far south in South America. However, it was not just the age and the location that made this skeleton very surprising or very popular. Luzia's skull and skeleton's characteristics were not that of any Asian or any Native American. According to the scientists and the archaeologists, she was more Africanized or Aboriginal Australian looking. And this new evidence shocked the archaeological community. Because as was said before, everybody was supposed to come across from Asia and coming down to Alaska. So we were supposed to all look like Asians. So the new evidence shocked the archaeological community, as I said. And then a second notable skeleton was found called Chanhol II. And this one was dated to 13,000 years. And this one was found in Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula, about 2008, and removed in about 2012. And once again, this skull was also compared to Aboriginal Australians and Eastern Pacific Islanders, or African looking, instead of the Asians or Native Americans. So how interesting. So it was said by Walter Neve, the professor of the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, that of all the skulls found in the Americas, those that date before 9,000 years ago were all African or Aboriginal looking. And anything younger than 7,000 years ago, our majority Mongolian or Asian looking. I repeat. Walter Neve, the professor of University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, states that of all the skulls found in the Americas, those that date before 9,000 years ago are all African or Aboriginal like, and anything younger than 7,000 years ago are majority Mongolian or Asian looking. But those were still not the most controversial skulls. The third and most controversial skeleton of those found would have to go to the Eve of Naharon, a female skeleton found in Mexico in an underwater cave off the Yucatan Peninsula as well. And just as Channel's skeleton, her skeleton also dated thousands of years. And what was special about this cave, it had been underwater since the Ice Age. So when archaeologists examined and carbon dated her skeleton remains, not only did they find out that she was of the Australian phenotype, she was also found to be over 13,600 years old, meaning that she was from a period before the glaciers had melted. Archaeologists said her presence so early is an archaeological mystery, since it had long been thought that the first Americans were Clovis people, not Aboriginal Australian looking people, and the Clovis people had journeyed through an opening in the Canadian ice sheets about 13,000 years ago. But Eva was on the Yucatan Peninsula in Central America, centuries before the ice sheets parted. So scientists said her people must have found another route into the Americas. Her people must have found a different route into the Americas. That is a powerful thing for an archaeologist to say. So they also said something else that is very telling. The scientists affirmed that they first thought that the Clovis people were the first humans to populate the Americas. So who are the Clovis people? Why did the Brazilian professor say that all the skeletons before 9,000 years ago resemble Africans and Aboriginal Australians, while those younger than 7,000 resembled those of Mongolians? So in 2014, an article came out in the National Geographic magazine titled "Most Complete Ice Age Skeleton Helps Solve Mystery of the First Americans." An article about another 12,000-year-old skeleton found in Mexico. So in this article, the author Glenn Hodges states, the oldest skeleton of its kind ever found, dating to more than 12,000 years ago, is helping to solve a mystery about the difference in body types between the first humans who arrived in the Americas and the later Native Americans. The ancient skulls are larger, their faces are narrower and more forward projecting, and they more closely resemble native peoples of Africa, Australia, and the southern Pacific Rim than they do their supposed American descendants. So once again, a scientist clearly states that the first skeleton of the original Americans do not resemble those of present-day Native Americans, but instead resembles Africans and Australians or Aboriginal Australians. So not to avoid any arguments, I have created a slide to highlight what Africans, Aboriginal Australians, and the original people of the Pacific Islands and what they look like, to show that they are all black people or melanated people. I have also created a slide with Clovis and Mongolian people, and then another slide with Native Americans that we can clearly see what they are referring to when they say the Native Americans of today have a Mongolian phenotype, allowing us to see clearly that they are differentiating between African-looking people and modern Mongolian, Asian-looking people. So the facts are that the oldest skeleton evidence in the Americas points towards an African or Australian-looking people first settled in the Americas, And these African and Aboriginal Australian people did not travel from Asia to get into North America. They first arrived in South and Central America over 13,600 years ago, centuries before the northern ice sheets melted, allowing humans to cross from Asia into the Americas. That would once again make Africans the first people to populate the Americas. So it seems archaeologists came to the same conclusion as geneticists. The first people to populate the world were black people. So if ancient people were saying that Africans, Ethiopians, were the first and the most ancient of all people, and now today's modern scientists are finding out the same information using modern techniques of science, they're finding out the same information that the oldest woman came from Ethiopia, Tanzania area. They're finding out the same information that when they go around the world, the first skeletons that they're finding are of African-looking people. So we no longer need to question who we are or where we're from or how it started. This is the beginning. We populated the earth. We were the original people, or we are the original people, and we are the mother race of the earth. It is what it is. It has been proven by science, by geneticists, and by historians. Well, I hope you have enjoyed part 1 of African origins. Slaves are masters. This is African Connections, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, we must control our own narrative and tell our own story. Let them believe what they want to believe, or let others believe what they want to believe. But we must tell our ancestors' story. We must tell our story. So once again, this is African Connections, and until part 2, take care. Bless.